Hello, it's Chris Hines from Wealthy. I hope you're doing well. Today I just wanted to run through a quick breakdown talking about the combined regionals and then comparing them to the combined cities. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen news articles and news reports over the past few months talking about that migration that we've seen into these regional locations across Australia. Now, I think a lot of people commonly think of regional locations or regional destinations in Australia as more of the outback, you could say, places like your Townsville, your Roma, and then you could also compare it to places further west of Sydney as well. But a lot of these regional locations that are commonly spoken about at the moment are more so your places like the Hunter Valley, the Sunshine Coast, the Hinterland, places that are very well known to many Australians in the country, places that have a lot to offer from a lifestyle perspective. It's obviously a fantastic place to live in some of these regional locations. They offer a fantastic level of, you could say, lifestyle benefits. Living in these more regional locations, it's a more affordable place to be purchasing as well. Well, it has been in historical data, and now we're starting to see a dramatic increase to both house prices and to rental prices in these more regional locations. So today I just want to run through some of the statistics, giving you a bit of a comparison about how they have grown over the past 3 months, the past 12 months, and also looking at you could say the more recent data over the past month as well, and then comparing it to how some of these combined capital cities are behaving as well. So we'll run through that today, and as always, if you've got any questions come the end of this video, please feel free to reach out to the team, or everyone is more than happy to have a chat. So we'll get started, and I think we'll start off with one of the articles that was published by The Guardian. It was published 2 days ago, and I'm sure many of you may have seen this article, but it was talking about house prices and rental surge in regional Australia and the influx of arrivals from cities. Now, as many of you are aware, borders are reopening this, or have been reopening this month in Australia, which is only going to gather more demand for some of these more regional locations. And a lot of people that move to Australia are aware of places like the Sunshine Coast, for example, or the Gold Coast, for example. And these are places where people overseas want to move to. So I still think there's going to be some substantial growth that we'll see in these more regional locations. I think some of them will begin to dwindle off. They will still see some more solid growth than you'll see in these combined cities. But I think as a whole, you're going to see some stronger growth in some of these more regional locations. And the purpose of this article behind me is really talking about locals and you could say, their issues that they're having with purchasing property in these areas that they've grown up in and been there for their childhood, their entire life really. And now they're being priced out of the region because they've seen such dramatic growth over the past 12 months through that COVID period. And as you can see in this article here, regional Australia has experienced record levels of growth across housing and rental markets in the past 12 months, according to a new report, as locals say the rising demand has priced them out of the market. House prices rose most sharply in the Southern Highlands and the Shoalhaven region in New South Wales, with an increase of over 38% in 12 months to the end of January 2022. And this is according to the NAB Regional Migration Impact on Property report as well. So it's coming from a influential source as well. Now, the continued flow of new arrivals into regional areas has placed an unprecedented level of upward pressure on property values, with many locations now experiencing dwelling values at new record levels. As you can see by this chart here, this is the top 10 performing regional housing markets in the country. The Southern Highlands, as I mentioned, was up there at about 38%, or just over 38%. As you can see, the Gold Coast is experiencing, you could say, about 35-36%. Same applies for the Sunshine Coast, which experienced about 35%. Hunter Valley, Launceston, Newcastle, all of these locations are over 30% growth in the past 12 months. So there's been a significant amount of demand that has come from these capitals in Australia, and really trying to benefit from that lifestyle perspective. I guess there was a lot of unknown through the pandemic, and that really caused the influx of people relocating to places where there were less strict restrictions. You could have a very decent way of living. It was a more affordable place for people to live to, so that you're not stuck in the CBD locations or capital locations where you're paying, you could say, a luxury tax for being there. So I think that we will continue to see more people move out of these cities now that the way in which we work has also been transformed, and we don't need to be in the corporate office every single day. You have more flexibility, you could say, with where you can work. Obviously, internet in Australia is also very established. You've got fantastic internet speeds across the country, which really makes it more accessible for people to work from home as well. So I think as a whole, you can see there's some very strong housing performance from some of these regional markets. In terms of rental values and how rental values have been moving, there's a list of the top 10 performing regional housing markets from a rental perspective, and it's a very similar story, you could say. Murray in New South Wales has seen about 25% or close to 30%, judging by this chart, in terms of rental growth over the past 12 months. Gold Coast about 17-18%. Outback Western Australia, you're looking at about 16% as well. Tassie or Launceston in Tasmania, about 16%. As well. Sunshine Coast about 15%, but as you can see, are very similar trends, and some of these regions that have experienced some incredibly strong price growth are now seeing some incredibly strong rental movement as well. So that was the first thing that I just wanted to point out and run through very quickly. Secondly, I wanted to run through this presentation here. We won't go through the loss of it, but we'll run through, or I guess, the comparisons between regional locations and then your capital cities for the 3 months, for the 12 months, and it should paint a pretty good picture as to how things are moving. Now, to start off with, we'll run through the regional combined growth over the past 3 months. So the average across Australia for the 3 months to the end of January 2022 was 3.4% growth or movement in dwelling values. Looking at your combined regionals, they sat at 6.3%. So that wave that we saw really 3 months ago in the combined capitals, where we saw the incredible price growth really in the build up to Christmas through October, November, December, we're now seeing that reflect in these combined regional locations as well. So I think as we begin to see, as this chart very clearly illustrates as well, the black or the darker line is the combined capitals, and then the combined rest of state, which is more of your regional locations, is the lighter line that you can see really running parallel to that darker combined capitals line. Now, as you can see, we've seen a drop off over the past 3 months in terms of growth, and that growth peaked, you could say, at around that just shy of that 8%, about 7.5%, and now it's gone down to 2.6% for the 3 months to January. So we can see that we had this trough, a lot of demand built up for people relocating back to these capital cities. We saw an incredible amount of growth in these regional or these combined capitals as well, and then it's dropped off, you could say, and we're not seeing the same levels of growth that we saw at the end of last year, which was to be expected, and we were expecting some form of correction in the form of growth to slow down. Now, with your combined rest of states, you can see that they experienced that same level of growth through 2021. And then they had a slight correction towards the back end of 2021, dropped down, you'd say about about 1%, and now it's gained momentum again. And I think we'll continue to see a very similar pattern in terms of its ups and downs over the next 3 to 6 months. I think we're still going to continue to see an influx of people relocating to these regional locations. And as I mentioned, for the purposes of it's a more affordable place to be living, you've got the lifestyle benefits as well on your doorstep, and it's becoming an increasingly more popular place for people wanting to be located, given that we've got you could say the flexibility now with where we work and how we work. So I think we're going to continue to see that migration to these more regional locations. Another point to note is the fact that these borders are reopening. I know I talk about it a lot, but I think that this interstate or this international migration that we're going to begin to see into Australia now that these borders are reopened is going to have once again a positive effect on these more regional locations. And I don't think it's the end of the solid growth. I think there is another 3 to 6 months of strong price growth from both a house price perspective, but also a rental perspective. There's a lot of demand for these locations. An example is my mother moved from Brisbane during the pandemic up to the Sunshine Coast. It took her about 6 weeks to find somewhere that she could move into because of the influx in migration, and that was from interstate migration at the time, but people moving up from your Melbournes and your Sydneys and your Brisbanes to benefit from a more affordable location, somewhere that they could live a better life as well. So that is, I think that's a lot of the drivers that are driving people to these more regional locations at the moment. Just to mention some of the best performing on the left-hand side over the 3 months. So regional South Australia, so places around Adelaide, for example, have performed the best, 6.8%, the 3-month change to January 2022, followed by regional Queensland at 6.7%, and then regional New South Wales at 6.5%, regional Tasmania at 6.4%, and the others sit a little bit further back. But those four as a whole are doing extremely well. And when we compare that to places in our combined capitals or our capital cities, Adelaide and Brisbane have been slightly different to places like your Sydney and Melbourne, only due to the fact that it's a more affordable place to be living, and you still have all your amenity on your doorstep. It's a very appealing place to live, and you're still in a very metropolitan place, somewhere where people want to be, doing international business. You've got international airports on your doorstep as well. So I think that's going to have a part to play with why we've seen such strong growth in both Adelaide and Brisbane over these past 3 months. As we've seen, we've begun to see a slight shift in the growth in these cities. They have slowed down substantially when we compare it to mid last year or towards the end of last year, and we're beginning to see the slowdown in demand and activity in some of these markets. But that doesn't go without saying. It's still somewhere that I believe over the next, or in particular Brisbane and Adelaide, are somewhere that I think we're still going to see some very modest levels of growth over the next 3 to 6 months. And I don't think we'll see some form of correction, but I think that we'll just see a slowdown in the amount of growth that we are seeing in these two cities at the moment. I guess another point worth noting out, and something that I guess we have to be aware of at the moment and also slightly cautious of, is the fact that Ukraine and Russia are now at war as of this morning, and that's something that I think is going to play on a lot of people's minds. I think it'll play a bigger part on a lot more of the institutional players in the game, but once again, that's something we don't want to think about at the moment, and touch wood, it doesn't get any worse than what it is. But that could have maybe an effect 6 months down the track. We'll just have to see how things play out with that whole crisis. Now, just quickly running over the 12-monthly changes. The last 12 months paint a very similar picture. The four states or the four locations that we mentioned in the first little slide, it correlates a very, very similar story. So regional Tasmania over the 12-month to January 2022 saw a 29.8% rise to property values. Regional Queensland 25.7%, regional New South Wales 30.1%, and regional Victoria 23.9%. Now, obviously, we saw some very strong growth at the start of last year in a lot of these capital cities, but as you saw over that 3-month graph, the growth has really slowed down. So I think that if you took a snapshot of this bottom chart here, so looking at your combined capitals, you're seeing Canberra at 25.5%, Hobart 27.6%, Adelaide 24.8%, Brisbane 29.2%, and Sydney 25.5%. And then you look at how the regional locations in Australia have been performing over the 3 months. It paints a very similar picture to how things may be tracking for these regional locations. So let's just say these combined capitals are essentially where regional locations are currently at today. And then if we were to look, let's say 12 months later down the track, I think the regional or the combined regional areas will look very similar to this chart that you can see below them now. We'll see some suppressed price growth, probably a slowdown in rental growth as well, but it's still going to be in a very appealing place for people to be located. I think there's still going to be a lot of demand for these regions and these locations across Australia, but obviously time will tell, and we'll see how it plays out. But I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Hopefully it's given you a good idea about the growth in some of these locations, more regional locations, and compared to these capital cities. As a whole, I think Australia's still got some strong growth up its sleeve over the next 3 to 6 months. I think we're going to continue to see not the same levels of growth that we saw 12 months ago, but we're going to see some conservative levels of growth in these combined capitals, and then I think the combined regionals have a little bit longer to run before we see some form of slowdown. But as a whole, some very positive signs. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Have a fantastic week. Thank you.